Hi, welcome to another Expert Insights discussion. Today we're joined by Stephanie Smith from Cogwheel Marketing, one of our expert partners. In this discussion, we explore how hotel sales and marketing can seem disconnected when looking at how to drive top-line revenue. With the continual change in traveller behaviour and how they go about researching and subsequently booking their travel, it is more imperative than ever that hotels take a balanced and strategic view of how they market to both their transient and group business. Stephanie feels hoteliers, in particular sales and marketing, do not approach these markets in quite the same way. Through this conversation, she outlines 10 areas to challenge your current thinking and lays out a simple point-scoring game you can play to see if you do indeed adopt a balanced approach, or maybe not. Hope you enjoy the conversation. What will you score? Hey, Stephanie, good to see you again. Great to have you join us. How are things with you? Okay?
Everything's awesome. Thanks for having me today, Trevor.
You're welcome. Now, why have we got you on this conversation? Well, apart from the fact that every time I talk to you, it's always interesting. We were talking a couple of weeks ago, just catching up, and you just happened to make a couple of comments that when I came off that discussion, I just thought, that's interesting. I want to explore that a bit more. And what we were talking about, you were just talking about, we were just catching up, and you were just saying how now everyone's kind of full on, deep into their budgeting, forecasting periods, maybe even got them completed by now. And then you made this statement, which was kind of like a throwaway as part of our conversation, which was that you feel there's this real disconnect between kind of sales and marketing, but how sales are forecasting their business. And I was trying to pull those threads together, and I thought, well, rather than trying to work it out myself, why don't I just ask you? So what were you, in the context of that forecasting and sales and group business and transient, what were you alluding to when you kind of made that comment?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking with quite a few, especially on the above property, but it definitely trickles down in on property. But, when we start looking at budget season and, usually you're sitting down with your budget and you're, looking at, your entire top line revenue goals going into 2024. Mm-hmm. So then, we got to work backwards. How are we going to reach those goals? So I went through an exercise with a couple of different companies where I was like, I'm talking to a DOS who probably also oversees marketing in some capacity, whatever that may or may not entail. And I have them go through a little exercise, and I say, okay, get a little sheet of paper, and I say, just write for 2024 what your top line revenue goals are. And then draw a line straight down the middle. And then on one side, put what your group goals are. On the other side, put what your transient goals are. So if you've got, different hotels have different business mixes. So maybe it's a 70-30, maybe it's a 60-40, maybe it's a 50-50, right? But whatever that is, it's a pretty simple equation. Most people can kind of work backwards based on their group goals.
So like 10 million top line, I'm a 70-30 mix, 7 million on one side, 3 million on the other, right, down the middle.
Yeah, so depending on whatever your ratio is.
Yeah.
So depending on how group heavy, your hotel might kind of lean towards, right? So, and I said, okay, in the column where your group goals are, you're going to write down all your strategies, everything that you're allocating to meet those group goals. You've got a sales team of some size. You're probably going to some conferences. You might be doing, some other initiatives with CVN or whatever the case may be. So on the group side, you've got all these things, and you total up, because that's what you're going to do to reach that group goal. Now on the transient side, I want you to go through the exact same exercise. What is it that you're going to do to meet those transient goals? Yeah. And then that sheet of the side of the paper is blank, or they look at me as the marketing person and say, oh, you and revenue management are going to fill up that side of the column. And I'm like, well, if you didn't give me any money to do that, or you gave me a very, proportionately, if you look at the investment you've made on the group side versus your investment on the transient, don't we look a little bit lopsided? And they all kind of look at me, and I mean, you kind of go into this knowing what the answer is going to be, but it's very clear, because I mean, I think traditionally a lot of DOSs probably got promoted into their, role because they were good at booking group sales. So it's a
Hmm.
comfort zone for them. But then when they get into the role where they have to oversee all top line, then they're like, well, this over here, the group side is what I'm good at. This is what I know. This is what I can lead my team on. But then they're also responsible for the other half of the equation, and it's uncomfortable for them.
And I guess in a way, the group, and I, straight out there, never been in hotel sales, so probably loads of comments or feedback say you don't know what you're talking about, and I get that. But to me, when I think about it, the transient bit seems like, well, out there somewhere, what can I do? Can I control it? Can I influence it? Whereas groups, I've got a list of prospects. I kind of know what I'm going to do. I know where I'm targeting. I know what events I can get. It seems slightly more straightforward to be able to compartmentalize and get my head around. Is that?
It seems more within their control, right? It seems
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a more direct relationship. Like if I do X, Y will happen, right?
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so I guess one of the other questions that I look at is that from a group perspective, you're dealing, again, if you've come from that background, you probably know those clients, you know the type of events that they're looking for, or the types of business that they're after. Again, you seem to be able to get a handle on it. From the transient side, and I think this is changing a bit in groups as well, initially from the inquiries, but the actual way that people are now engaging, making choices around how they are booking, where they are booking, has dramatically changed, and was changing anyhow. And then obviously post pandemic has just changed again, you could argue. And when we were chatting, you were just, again, when we were talking off the cuff, you were just throwing out some statistics of things that you have done through these exercises. Can you talk a little bit to some of the, just some of those headline areas that influence, that demonstrate how that has changed?
Yeah, and we'll have to share. Expedia does these kind of like quarterly, I don't know, infographics or kind of reports that they do. We'll have to drop that in the show notes. But the one they did just a few months back was, really understanding that customer journey. And this is on the both and the group transient side. But when you look at a lot of hoteliers tend to use our RMS, our revenue management system, to focus on that point of booking. What this Expedia report shows is how many days it takes when they've actually decided to make the transaction or decided to book at this hotel. That's a very quick decision. The actual, process of making the reservation is very, very straightforward. But what it
Yep.
basically showed was how many days, weeks, and months leading up until that transaction, how that customer journey is all the different touch points happening up until that point, right? So if we only look at our RMS and what our pickup's been and what we have on the books, then we're missing everything that happens up until that point. So
Sure. Yeah, yeah. We kind of say, okay, this has happened.
yeah,
We think of it's going to happen in the future because they're booking for the future, but it's already happened. They've kind of booked already. They made the
yeah, the
decision.
reservation's made
It's
now at
that,
this
yeah,
point.
it's that decision process you're referring to.
Yeah. And the other thing that they kind of walk you through in the Expedia is they're looking at, whether you're booking, a hotel or airline or car rental and all the different touch points. So we've all heard about, that inspiration phase versus the consideration phase, but it basically says during each pieces of this customer journey, how much of an impact it has. So like one of the, diagrams that they have, it shows that 77% of travelers are influenced by social media. I think everybody knows that. Everybody knows that, everybody's consuming some type of social media. First of all, 77% is a very high statistic, but when it comes down to the actual point of transaction, social media is almost at zero. So that means there'll be an influence along the way, but when it comes to transactional, at the point of booking, they're not using social media to actually transact. So there's always this, if we're running social media campaigns, there's always this disconnect where the owner's like, well, what was my return on ad spend? Well, I say, well, it's not like people were scrolling through their Facebook feed and they're like, let me stop what I'm doing and make this reservation. Like there was a whole lot that happened up until that point of making the reservation that we have to influence before we ask them to give us their credit card.
Got you. That makes sense. Yeah, and I guess within that social media space, you're looking at things like travel bloggers? Where does review sites and stuff like that come into play?
Well, this particular report categorizes it in a lot of different ways. I think blogs is a separate category on there.
Okay.
But it has like your own website. It's got the meta search, so it's got it really tiered into a lot of different places, and that's where in our previous conversation we've talked about that whole ecosphere of what does the total online presence look like,
Yep.
and that diagram really details all the different places where you have to be ready and on the shelf and impacting that customer journey.
I've got you. And I think as well, one of the things that stuck with me that you mentioned is that I think there were two stats that I was looking back, I'd made a note of, is that one, I think it was an old stat, and I don't know if it's changed, but that consumers, and this I think you were implying now could be transient or groups, that they would look at like 38 different sites before actually booking, or 38 different sites, and that nearly 3 in 5 travelers did not have a specific destination in mind when they first got into that exploratory phase. Did I make a note of those?
Yeah,
Right.
both of those are kind of mind blowing. I think the number of sites they visit is depending on that segment, right? If I'm
Yeah.
And I guess I'll look at it from a personal standpoint. If I'm, going to a conference, I might look at 2 sites before I make the transaction. If I'm booking a family vacation, I might look at more than that. So you
Yeah.
really have to look at it from a segmentation standpoint. But I think no matter what, not having that specific destination in mind is a really hard thing, from a marketing standpoint for us, because you're looking at it, there's so many factors that go into play, some of which you control and some of them which you don't. I mean, we were just planning our own company retreat. And granted it's 12 room nights, but we still have to be, but we're coming all from all across the United States and Canada. So we're like, there's so many logistics that go into how do you choose a destination?
Yeah.
And how do you influence that purchase decision based on the destination, based on the hotel, based on, logistics of travel and all that goes in. And I think it's just important for people to realize a lot of that buying decision happens so much earlier than you think that it does.
One of the things that, and this is then when I came away, and you shared a little bit more information of some of these exercises that you'd been doing with some clients, is that when I was connecting these dots and thinking, well, we feel we've got a greater grasp on the group's business, maybe less so on the transient business, but maybe there's some assumptions in that as well. And maybe we're still operating the way we always had done. Are we recognizing how much the customer, whoever that customer might be, how their choices or their engagement in those early phases might have changed? And so, and there was something that you'd written in one of these information you'd sent over to me, which was about being on the shelf. You've got to be on the shelf, and I kind of looked at it and thought, well, you've got 2 products: your transient product, your group product, and you've got lots of different shelves you've got to be on, because you've got to be, now you've got to be in all of these places. And it was, to your point, that word that you used before, the ecosystem that we've touched on previously. I mean, it's a lot more complex. So how have you been able to like distill that complexity down into like some solid points when you work with your clients, and say, okay, these are like the shelves you need to be on, or these are the things you need to consider?
Yeah. And I think the mindset that I'm just kind of trying to break, but I mean, it's been like this for years, pre-pandemic, post, but
Good luck with
like
changing it then.
we're here talking on the 8th of the month. So I get the panic email or the panic call from somebody on property that's like, oh no, my hotel's not going to meet budget. I'm behind pace. And I'm like, first of all, you should have known this long before the middle of the month before you call,
Yeah,
and I'm like, if we're not, some of the time we do have some tactics, some, tools in our toolbox that we can employ to catch that low hanging fruit. But what at this point in the month, we've already negated, the first, couple weeks, couple months of that journey. So it's a very last minute thing to be like, okay, so if we're not already on the shelf, it's hard for me to, if you're buying a car, to manufacture it from the ground up and get it on the parking lot by the time you're ready to buy it. So it's the same thing with hotels. Like a lot of these, if we're not hitting them at the different points in the in that journey, it's kind of too late by the middle of the month to do a lot.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what kind of tactics? I mean, you use the word there, tactics that you have. What kind of things when you're talking to, if you were recommending to clients, and maybe let's go to your point there, you can't maybe change anything next week or maybe even next month, but there are some things you could start to consider and do to help you understand, are you on the right shelf? Are are you on the shelf for groups? Are you on the shelf for transient? All these different shelves. Are there some tactics that you go through or will work through with your clients that you could share?
Yeah, and for my competitive people out there, a lot of people, especially on the sales side, are pretty competitive. I do this little exercise to see if they're on the shelf on both sides. So it's a kind of a pointing, it's a game where you can see how many times you score points.
Okay.
So I have, right? So I have basically 10 tactics, and each component most of them have a group and a transient side. So to kind of get both sides of the brain thinking, you can get a half a point for a group, a half a point for a transient. So you can get up to 10 points. I've never had anybody get 10 points. I actually rarely have people, once you add up the half points, most people, are lucky to get 5, but it's a good way to just kind of think, if you're comfortable in the group side and you're doing on the group side, here's how to do it on the transient or vice versa.
So you're saying they could get 10 out of 10 if they get both sides covered in these 10 tactics. But the challenge that you've laid down is that most that you're dealing with score 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a foundation, right? You got to kind of,
Yeah.
you got to
You gotta
have
layer
the,
it up.
you can't like accelerate straight. What is that? You got to walk before you run. You can't go
Yeah.
straight into sprints, right? You got to kind of work on it. But so we'll start out with kind of some of the quote unquote easier ones.
Yep.
And then kind of build upon those tactics as we go.
So what would be where would you start?
So the first piece I would start was just, inspiring content and video. So
Mhm.
I think, a lot of people have great images to this point. Video is still a struggle. So there's an opportunity there, but on the group and the transient side. So a lot of times, we have great pictures of our room product, great pictures of our lobby, but are we doing the same thing in terms of helping, there's been a lot of talk with, I have to clean that up.
It's been a lot
The
of talk.
traditional meeting planner has evolved. So a lot of the people that are booking events and stuff aren't your seasoned meeting planners. So they're going to use a lot of the same tactics when as a transient person looks at. So, are we
I've got you.
painting a picture
Yep.
using imagery and video of what the meeting space could be? So instead of us having a big shot of our ballroom with empty chairs, how are we allowing them to visualize what our space can be? And doing that on a more regular basis versus just those standard, hotel ballroom shots that we have.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So that's the content video. Next tactic.
Yeah.
So they've got to see. Okay, they might score half a point for having videos and imagery for the transient, but they might lose half a point because they haven't got anything on the group side.
Yeah. How are we, sharing what we consider a successful event, things like that. So the next tactic is leveraging social campaigns. So, I don't, I'll be the first to say social isn't going to be right for every hotel. So you got to make sure it's worth the time investment. But again, we can look at this from a group and a transient standpoint. So a lot of times our followers on our social campaigns are going to be transient, but on the social side, are we leveraging LinkedIn from a group standpoint?
Yeah, good
From
point.
also, from a paid side, we can target transient travelers, but we can also target group, like we can target, weddings or, baby showers, things like that.
Mhm.
Holiday parties, things like, leveraging paid to drive RFPs through social. So targeting, again, that less seasoned meeting planner that might be your, admin at some corporate office.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, from a marketing point of view, that's kind of almost not reactive's the wrong word, but I guess where does email come into this? Because that's obviously one that you can be quite targeted about.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different levers to pull with email. And, our company, Cargo Marketing, we do a lot of support for branded hotels, and they think that they can't do anything with email, but there's definitely some opportunities. on both the group and transient side. So we've had some really good results with like awareness campaigns through email, especially for new openings and conversions to target transient groups, transient travelers. But you can participate outside of Cvent. You can do things like ePro Direct and Convention Planet. And then you also have your own CRM. So on the group side, how are you leveraging your, Delphi or whatever CRM that you're using on the group side to continue those communications outside of doing any type of CRM, email marketing through your PMS. So there's a lot of different levers you can pull if you kind of look at it from a group and transient and look at what databases you do and don't have, and then how you can supplement that.
I would think, I would imagine that's an area on the email side of things where most hotels will score a full point, wouldn't they? They'll have their database for the groups, their database, their CRM for the transient, and they're always email
You would think so.
marked. Oh dear. Okay. All right. where, where does the whole Google pay-per-click search engine marketing, where does that come?
Yeah, if anything, I would think this would probably more people would score points on this. So tactic number 4,
Okay. Yep.
is leveraging search engine marketing and PPC. So this is, really looking at people, targeting. When you look at that customer journey, a lot of times people are kind of in market, so looking at that consideration phase. So where I think a lot of hotels probably do well is they're investing in some type of pay-per-click, hotels near XYZ, hotels in XYZ city, things like that. And then obviously some of their branded terms, but it's definitely something you can do on the group side as well. So, people looking for specific event venues and things like that. And then coupling that, to go kind of a layer deeper on both the group and transient side, honing in on, what are your feeder markets, what direct flights you have. So you make sure that you're looking for people and aligning with people that are likely to come to your market just based on ease of travel.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So far you've covered off inspiring content videos, social campaigns, email marketing, search engine marketing, PPC. That's 4. What's coming 5th?
Number 5, I think this is, something hopefully somebody will get points on their scoreboard, but the consistent storytelling. So, when we talked about one with the inspiring content and video, I think there's a piece of, making sure that your own website direct channels have the best story, so to speak, but we need to carry that through with those regular audits. So how are we telling that story on Expedia, on Booking, on Cvent, on any of our other third-party listings, our CVVs, our, if we're, there's other kind of Cvent type websites. So how are we leveraging those sites? So I have the opinion, yes, we want everybody booked to direct. We want everybody to go direct, but there's certain consumers that we just have to be, again, on the shelf on those third-party platforms, whether we like it or not, because that's what they're going to use. Yeah. So as much as you want to bring them in direct, if they choose to use a third-party channel, whether it's on the group or transient side, like an OTA or Cvent, then it is what it is. Like you just have to, be ready and have the best presence there you can as possible.
It's back to our analogy of being on the shelf. We may not want to have our products on that particular shelf, but if that's where the customers are going shopping, we have to put it on the shelf, don't we? And work, and then maybe do something else around it. Quick question on that, because I think 2 things struck me there. Is that I guess one was the word consistent, and that is across the channels. And I think sometimes keeping that consistent and fresh can often be a challenge. I guess the second thing that struck me is I could imagine back to like our video piece, it would seem easier to be storytelling and maybe more consistent about our storytelling in areas where our transient business might be, and maybe less so with our guest stories. That a very big, poor assumption on my part?
No, I think it's a good assumption. I think, I feel like sometimes we don't address some of these things until it's a problem. So we don't realize that, we're inconsistent or have a poor image or something until somebody complains about it. Right. So I think the other piece of that is being proactive about addressing some of these things and looking at it from a 30,000 foot.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so that was number 5 around our consistent storytelling. What's number 6?
So number 6 is one of my predictions going into 2024. And that's around leveraging, thinking about all the different touch points that we have, front desk usually being the main one, but we have so many more opportunities to touch the guest. So I feel like we're finally evolving where like our F&B operations and our outlets are actually a value add versus this redheaded stepchild that we have to have as an amenity to check a box. Um, so, I've seen, we've had a lot of good conversations with companies who are leaning in towards, getting in front of the local community to help with the F&B outlets. So being a part of the community, because traditionally hotel restaurants were for just the people staying at the hotel.
Yeah.
But there's also ways on the free side that you can do this from an event activation standpoint. So if you're doing, live music or happy hours, you can be leveraging those through Google My Business events and also Facebook events. So if people are looking for, things to do near me this weekend, or those will come up on search. And those are actually free things that we can do. But it also applies to, like we had a hotel that was doing, like a sales blitz, kind of an event for like a VIP event. So we were trying to leverage some of those other opportunities just to kind of, again, put us on the shelf in some of those maybe less thought of or more transient ways of thinking when it comes to group. And then also just, leveraging packages that come along with it. So I think a lot of people have the free breakfast package or something like that. But I mean, people, they're looking for an experience, and F&B is where you can really provide that experience.
Yeah.
It's really hard to give this mind-blowing chicken experience, but the F&B side of things is certainly an opportunity to help.
How does that balance with when you're talking with our 2 scores? So again, our half point on the transient, half point on the groups. How do you key into that with the F&B events on the group side of things?
Well, I think that when you look at, I think different people calculate top line revenue differently, but I think I think the ancillary revenue should be part of looking at total top line. So I think a lot of people, especially on the sales side, don't think about that ancillary revenue as part of the total package. But I also think they need to realize that meeting planners want the full experience, right? So if you've got, and it's kind of a, your restaurant still matters to the people. Your meeting planner is going to look at that hotel as a total experience package too.
Got you. That makes sense. And you mentioned there about on that 6 using the F&B event, and you spoke about the community and engaging the community, and it's not just about the people out of town staying at your hotel. I guess that and the next point I think you had was about local organizations, strategic partnerships. How does that kind of tie in?
Yeah, I think number 7, like leveraging local partnerships and strategic partnerships in your market. I mean, it sounds basic, but I think it's about how do we use those relationships that you have, and as a salesperson, how do you leverage those to kind of extend into the online space to leverage that to reach more people in that customer journey. I was having a call actually this week with a hotel in New Orleans, and both the GM and DOS had been longtime natives of New Orleans. And I'm like, that's it. More than you think about that. Once you all the hidden spots. So how does that, I'm like telling this DOS, I'm like, who the people are, right? I would assume at this point. So how are you, if I go to your CVB site, how many of these packages, how many of these experience packages are you putting into that space for that specific consumer that is using the CVB to research your destination? If you're looking at, from a state tourism site, a lot of states have great state tourism sites. They've got their own events calendar. They've got their own experiences, their own newsletter. So they have their own, audience that you can leverage on your behalf. So if you say, hey, I want to get in front of your audience, how can I, utilize your captivative audience? And that's a group and a transient play. So CVBs, state tourism sites, they have a section for events, and they have a section. So you got to look at it with 2 lenses, those partnerships with 2 lenses. The other piece of it that goes into any demand generators that we have, and a lot of, traditional DOS, if you're focused on group, you're going to forget about, maybe some of the museums you can with. You
Yeah.
might forget about some of the colleges that might, what are you doing for graduation weekends? What are you
Yeah,
doing
good point.
for move-in dates? Things like that,
Hmm.
that we have to think about the transient side. And who knows, maybe you get a BT account out of some of the, out of some of those when you're looking at through a transient lens, you might be able to pick up some BT accounts too.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at that, when you think of when you said local organizations and strategic partnerships, you think about businesses and that is group business. But you're right, with colleges, universities, museums, they could be group, but it's also tapping into the transient and finding partnerships with those businesses, but where they bring transient business into the area. So no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so that was number 7, leverage local organization strategic partnerships. What's number 8?
Yeah, so this is, if you're doing if you've scored really well and you've got your, 5 to 7 points up into this date, this is kind of, I would say, kind of next level. And if you've got a decent budget you're working with, how can you really target that top of funnel, really impact that inspiration phase? So early stage bookers. So on there's a lot of different ways that you can run display marketing. So this is, if you're, an example, if you're looking on your news site and you see an ad for a hotel, that's usually going to come across as a display ad. So there are different ways you can do that. So, if you're running a display campaign through Google, you can target by interest, you can target people, that are coming to your market. But, we've been using a lot of device ID campaigns as of late. So different data partners. So this is where it gets weird. If you've got your cell phone, you can, my cell phone, they know that Stephanie Smith was at at this concert on this date. Or they know that I went to XYZ conference on this date. So you can start to say, I want to target, like we've had on the group side, a hotel that's leveraged, they can't afford to go to every IMAX and every other, meeting planner event. So we actually use this technology to target people that we know that were meeting planners at those events. But you can do the same thing on the transient side. So for aspirational, we have hotels whose aspirational comp set is not in their market. So they're competing against other destination hotels in other markets. So we're using that technology to leverage repeat guests of those to say, hey, if you like this resort, you'll also like ours. So the level of targeting is really cool there. You can even, exclude people that, like, based on the patterns of the phone, they know that this person's an employee. We're not going to waste spending our money showing ads to people that, are employees of this, of this convention center or this hotel.
I like that's kind of very
pretty neat and kind of scary at the same time, right?
yeah, that's kind of, but they're always the fun ones though, aren't they? Because they kind of get you kind of get you close to a line. Okay, so that was device ID, which was number 8. What next one can we go to?
So I think number 9, we're going to do reviews. And I think a lot of people think about reviews as an operational tactic, but I think it's important, that our sales teams realize that a transient and a meeting planner or group person actually are going to look at the same thing. So they're going to look at, because they want to make sure their guests have a good experience. So just like how transient people read reviews, there's a statistic that said that reviews are the user-generated reviews is the number 2 thing that people look for on the meeting planner side. So it's just as important. Yeah. So, and I also think this is just, me and my predictions. Like there's all these websites that you can look at transient reviews. You can look at Google, you can look at Expedia, look at your own website. But there isn't any place for meeting planners to leave reviews. And I think we have this like coveted place where we don't share any of our group reviews internally because we know meeting planners talk. But I would love to see more hotels take advantage of LinkedIn to get meeting planners to leave reviews on their behalf and use that as kind of a sounding board, like a marketing, play to say, hey, like these people, look at the great experiences these people have and let those people be the storytellers for your hotel.
And I guess as well, just connecting a couple of dots there back to the earlier about the videos and the storytelling, you could put a generic video together around your meeting space, but you can, if you've got a review and they're okay for you to use the review, you can then put the words and overlay that into, so within the video itself you're getting reviews are coming up that people are seeing as they're watching your video as well. So you're kind of reinforcing that it's not just us promoting it, but also here's some validation with people that have used this meeting space and enjoyed it. So it's kind of linking those elements together, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and then the last thing, the number 10. So we went through the top 9. Now at the 10th, we're kind of bringing it all together and saying, hey, now we have to look and say what's worked, what hasn't worked. So any, marketing initiatives of the 9 that you're doing, you really have to evaluate them and say, did we have the correct goals aligned? Did we have the right KPIs aligned? But now we have to say, how do we say what's good and what's bad? So how are you benchmarking yourself? Are you only benchmarking against your own self? Are you benchmarking against, a grander, against looking outside of your own bubble? And we traditionally tend to look and say, okay, what was our return on ad spend? How many impressions did we get? How many clicks did we get? Not that those metrics don't matter, but we really have to start saying, how do we evolve what our scorecard looks like? What does our total online presence look like? And self-servingly, we do have a product, Cogwheel Analytics, that brings it all together. So you can say, hey, in this digital space, how good is my online presence compared to other hotels?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that's it's an obvious factor, but it'll be interesting to know how many people score highly on really evaluating what has done well, what hasn't gone well, and making sure the relevant factors are properly aligned. And sometimes that also comes back to understanding what you want in the first place and what you're setting out. Because if you haven't set your goals specifically enough or correctly aligned, then when you evaluate, it's obviously going to be out of kilter, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times you can look at it and say, what am I doing to reach people in each stage? Going back to that Expedia paper, when you look and say, between the inspiration down through booking, down through stay, how are we hitting people at each point of this customer journey? So I think that's, important to look at. I think a lot of people probably, have something like Demand 360 or Calibri Labs where they can say, how is my, at a basic level, how is my channel mix? So how am I, from an online standpoint, my website and my OTAs, how am I pacing against other hotels? So historically, am I getting my fair share? And then looking into the future, am I getting my fair share? So at a basic, I hope people are doing that, but I think it can go much deeper than that and looking at the, more details of each of the ecospheres we talked about.
I think it's interesting. I can imagine when you go into one of your hotel clients and say, right, okay, and you ask them those upfront questions and get them just very simply, okay, put out what your top line revenue is, how are you going to do it? Right, now score how you're working against these 10 tactics. But there must be, you can imagine some of the light bulbs that are going on, but then coming out of that, having a clear identify where are the areas where there's good things that are going on that can be solidified and built on, and where are the gaps that obviously need to be rectified. Sometimes you just need that cut through of the clarity, don't you?
Yeah. Well, you got to have the mindset to say, okay, I'm going to do something to modify my strategy before you can start using those tactics, right? We got to make sure we have a lot of people want to jump straight into tactics and we haven't thought about what our strategy is. Who do we want to go after? What segments are we not getting our fair share? What are our goals? And how are you going to meet them? So you got to have to do that foundational strategy work before you can jump into those tactics too.
Well, it'd be interesting. We don't normally ask for lots of comments on our videos because we're kind of not one of these funky cat videos or something that people are going to comment on. But maybe, who knows, maybe someone that watches this actually goes and does the exercise and is brave enough to put in the comments what score they got if it wasn't 10.
Well, how about if somebody wants to share we can bring them on and have another discussion and they can say how well they scored and how that is that how is that kind of come through in their star reports? How has that come through in their kind of meeting their top line goals?
Yeah, that'd be a really good thing. Get them together, get you together, have a conversation around it. That would be very useful.
It'd be fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, look, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thanks for that. As I say, it started by us just having a catch-up conversation, and then a whole idea spun out of it. But I can understand where what you meant now by that disconnect between the sales and the marketing, and okay, here's a number, but how are you going to get there, and are you on all the shelves, and are you doing the right thing? So thanks for sharing those techniques, always, and tactics. Always a pleasure. Great to talk with you.
Thanks, Trevor.
Well, I hope that conversation was of interest, and thanks again to Stephanie for joining us. If you have any thoughts or views on this conversation, please feel free to comment below, maybe even put down what you scored. If you like the discussion, also, please don't forget a thumbs up. And if you're interested in more of our videos, here is a link to our Expert Insights playlist. And here is the link to our Coffee Time Chat playlist. And here is the button if you'd like to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks again for watching.